I'm Shelley Noble, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Shelley Noble.
Thanks for tuning in to the Author Stories Podcast for yet another author interview and bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. We've got a fantastic interview for you today, but before we get into it, I'd like to tell you about some sponsors. Mindy Tarquini. Mindy has been a guest on the show a couple of times, and there's some links down in the show notes to her past episodes. I'd like to tell you about her book, The Infinite Now. She was on the show last year to talk about it. This book is mind-blowing and amazing. It was a 2017 Today Show Winter Book Selection 2017 winner of the USA Best Book Awards. In flu-ravaged Philadelphia, a young immigrant struggles to learn the intricacies of time-bending, teamwork, and living in a world which seems as hell-bent on breaking her spirit as she is to keep it. This is not your mother's historical fiction. Kirkus calls The Infinite Now a well-woven tapestry of history, character, and charming mystery. BuzzFeed called it a masterpiece. The Historical Novel Society says Tarquini uses words like a composer. School Library Journal said The Infinite Now is historical fiction portrayed in a new way and declared it a title not to be missed. Do not miss this book. There's a link to it in the show notes at hankgarner.com. I'd also like to thank editor Ellen Campbell for sponsoring the show. Ellen has been a faithful sponsor of the show for quite some time, and she's an editor that I have used. She's someone that I trust. When you're writing a story, you need someone that can have that critical eye that helps your words be better, yet still retain what you meant. That's what a great editor does. She helps you to tell your story the best way possible. Ellen can do that for you. Find her at ellencampbelledits.com. ellencampbelledits.com. Thank you, Ellen, for sponsoring the show. I'd also like to thank Ernest Dempsey for sponsoring the show. Ernest writes a series of books, among others, called the Sean Wyatt Adventure Series. I got to be friends with Ernest because I had him on the show last year because I discovered his books as a reader. And these are some of the best mystery, conspiracy theory books that I had found in quite a while. His newest book is called The Templar Curse. It's been out since the spring, and there's a brand new one coming soon. There are 15 books in this series, and this is one of my all-time favorite series. And Ernest is a really nice guy as well. He's one of those writers that you love his work, and you love him too. Check out the series in the show notes. The Sean Wyatt Adventure Book Series by Ernest Dempsey. Stay tuned after our great author interview for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. And also remember that Richard just released Book 4 in the Jason Crane series, this massive, massive series that is continuing on. The brand new book, Book 4, is out. And also look for Richard to join me for our annual Halloween show. Now on to our great author interview. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Shelley Noble on the show with me. Shelley has a fantastic new book. It's the first book in the Lady Dunbridge Mystery series, and it's called Ask Me No Questions. When I first got this book, the cover alone, and we all know you shouldn't judge books by their cover, but we absolutely do judge books by their cover. And the cover is fantastic, and I was pleasantly surprised that the story is amazing as well. Welcome to the show, Shelley.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you, Shelley. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, I'm from the South, and South breeds storytellers.
Absolutely.
And I always wrote stories. In fact, when I was cleaning out my mother's house a couple of years ago, I found my very first saved story. It took place when I was in the first or second grade, and it was about a duck family who lived in a puddle in my driveway, which there was no duck family there, but I never thought about being an actual writer till much later. I always wrote stories. I worked on the school newspapers. And when I was a professional dancer, so when I had off once, when in the city between tours, I decided to take a course at the New School in creative writing. And I wrote a couple of short stories there, and it was a lot of fun. But it wasn't until I retired from dance and moved to the suburbs for my kids to go to school that a friend of mine, and we were in the Guggenheim Museum talking about what were we going to do next in life. And she said, "You should write a mystery." I said, "I can't. I don't know. I never, ever know who done it till the very end." And she says, "Oh, it can't be that hard." So we went to get some books on how to write a mystery, and I did. And I made the short list in the St. Martin's contest for Malice Domestic. And then I got an agent, and then he sold my book, and suddenly I was a professional writer. So I was a little surprised by my new career, but, dancers are always retiring when everybody else is reaching the corner office. So it was sort of a perfect segue into something else creative.
Oh, there's so much about that I want to ask you. Well, first off, what part of the South did you grow up in?
Georgia. 18 years. Where are you?
I'm in South Mississippi, so we're pretty close cousins there. Mm-hmm. But you left to go to New York to pursue dancing? Is that right?
Actually, I went to the University of Utah first as a dance and philosophy major. And then I moved to California when I graduated and taught for a year in the college there, and then decided, have to go to New York. All dancers go to New York. So I did. Had a lovely, crazy career.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I am always fascinated by is how different artistic expressions are connected in some way. And you might think of maybe a painter that then wants to write because then you get to tell the other side of the story that you couldn't tell visually, maybe, or maybe the visual expression maybe makes the writer more acute in the way they describe things. There's a connection there. Or a great one is actors that become writers because then they get to tell the rest of the story that they're not allowed to tell because someone else is a director, or that sort of. Do you sense any sort of connection in dance and physical expression like that and your writing?
There are so many things to unlayer in there, yes, but it's like two opposite ends of the spectrum that somehow interlace in the middle. As a dancer, in the type of dancing I did in the company, a choreographer, the creative person, came in and taught you steps, and you learned and you performed, and it was somebody else's work that you shaped and molded, and then it was just the action of the art was you and 100 or 1,000 people at night. So there was nothing in between you and the direct communication. Whereas writing, you're sort of the choreographer, and it's a totally solitary existence. In a dance, you're always working with other people. You're in the court of ballet, or you're the star with the other people, or there's interconnecting modern dance. But with a writer, you're there with these imaginary people who, some of which are your friends and some of which are not at all. And so that you channel that through many characters, and they're the ones that confront the audience, so to speak, which is the reader. So it's all interconnected in a bizarre sort of artistic way.
Yeah. And, I think people think I'm weird for asking those kinds of questions sometimes, but I absolutely see those connections, and, it's all storytelling, and which is, what I love about talking to people, and especially people with different creative outlets, because I think by learning those little nuggets of truth from people, I think it makes me a better storyteller. And hopefully we can all pick up some tips from each other.
Absolutely. And different art forms can lead you to different ways. I've worked in a lot of movies. So that sort of shows me how to do a scene and how to get that button on a scene and a quick edit. Rather than, I don't write just a chapter and a chapter. I have lots of scenes within my chapters, and a lot of that comes from film and trying to segue that into what happens. This action is happening. We cut away to something, and without getting too confusing, because you have lots of words but no pictures.
Right. But if you're good at it, your words are better than pictures.
I know some people that would not agree with that, but I'm with you.
Yeah,
I've done both sides. So yeah, this is my place. I love dancing. It was a great gig.
Yeah,
and it was a wonderful experience. I met incredibly creative minds and went to wonderful places. And now I literally live in my one room practically. I hardly go to the other part of the house because I'm working all day long and never leave my seat except to walk around, get coffee.
Yeah, I can relate to that. That's that's the writer's life, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Shelley, you grew up in the South, but you wound up in New York, and the new book is a period piece set in New York. And I don't want to get too deep into the new book yet, but how did being in New York and kind of settling there, how has that changed the way maybe you see the world? How do you think it affects your writing?
That's a huge question and a good one. Let me see. First of all, New York is a place unto itself. It's the crossroads of the world, one of the many crossroads of the world. In the South, since I was, I left when I was 18. It was my formative years. It was a very insular place. It was about family. It was about community. It was about, the history. I learned about the world really more through books than through the actual living of it. But of course I was a child, so that's normal for just about any place. I got to New York as an adult, and it was like the kaleidoscope suddenly changed into a picture that you could understand, all the fragmented pieces. It's like, wow, the energy, the choices that you get to make every day. It's a tough place to live. It's not easy. I mean, it's easy to go downstairs and get your coffee from the deli, but it's hard to go anywhere else because you have to make an effort. So in the South, things came to you. People visited. People.
Right. New York is a very old city as far as American cities go. I mean, it has a lot of deep history, but it also seems like because it is a crossroads of the world, you get a large influx of new people all the time, and the stories are always kind of churning over, and you get new, fresh input all the time. My family and I, we moved out west for a few years back about 15 or so years ago. And one of the things that really surprised me, was that there was, that everything was new there, and no one was from there. Everyone had moved into there. There were a lot of military installations around, and there were no roots there. And while that's kind of shocking when you come from, a place where we have, 300-year-old, towns and things around it, very deep history, and, everybody knows everybody's uncle and all this sort of stuff. And then when you go somewhere where everything is new, that causes you to think differently and to, and then when you start thinking about story, that causes you to exercise different muscles. I'm guessing New York is kind of that way too.
It is, but the thing about New York is it's kept largely, not in all cases, but it's kept its history. It's actually a very young city in the scheme of other cities of the world. And I think that gives us a freedom to explore ahead. But I think there's also a danger of not appreciating, I won't say our roots, because our roots actually come from all over the world. We settled here we were not the indigenous people in this country. So because of that, the what most people call finding your roots and settling into your roots is actually opening you up to a whole world. There have been influxes of different cultures decade after decade, and it just makes the tapestry of what you're writing back that much richer.
Right. You mentioned earlier that someone suggested that you should write a mystery, but you said you didn't know who done it until the very end.
Sometimes I still don't.
But doesn't that make for a great mystery? If the writer doesn't even know, then it's going to be pretty difficult for the reader to say, "Oh, I pegged this from the very beginning."
Actually, it would seem so, but after having written, I don't even know how many I've written, quite a few. I now know that you need to have an idea of you don't have to choose exactly the villain at the beginning, but mystery is not just fooling the audience. You have to make it so that they feel like they're a part of the discovery of the villain. And even though there's surprises along the way, you can't wing it, because it's my responsibility to get the clues and the red herrings and the people you really want to be the murderer who isn't, and the people you least expect to be the murderer who might be, but then it could be somebody else. And you kind of have to build. I find that I also write women fiction like beach reads. And I find that while that is more like the map of somebody's emotional journey of the book, mystery, you really have to set up the foundation and build the house so it doesn't turn into a house of cards that falls apart. And then, because you know what, I can change. If I set up my mystery correctly or well enough people have alibis that I can change my mind at the end.
Sure.
So I know that sounds a little strange, but
no. So what is your planning process like before you start writing a book? If you have learned to really think them through and to have be more prepared as a writer in the beginning, I guess. So what is your preparation like when you get the idea for a new story? How does it begin to take shape?
Well, in the case of historical mystery, I have my periods. Like, I'm a big late Victorian American theater buff. So, of course, my interest is in New York, and then the Newport, the Gilded Age, is a really wonderful period because it's sort of the modern age. Every age is a modern age to the people who live in it. But so I get a feeling of what's going on at the time, and then I have these characters. It's like when I did Lady Dunbridge, I had been reading a lot of dime novels, which were, the kind you buy on every newsstand on the corner. There were serials. And I thought, in the Gilded Age, young heiresses went to England or the continent to marry a title. And so poor Lady Dunbridge is a widow, a dowager English countess. So she said, well, if they can come over here and make a future, I can move over there and make a future. So I wanted that kind of sense of people coming into the city, how the city absorbs them. So I play with that idea, and my characters kind of gradually form. And then if you're lucky, which I happened to stumble across an article for the first Lady Dunbridge about this racing kingpin who had been found dead in his car with his Floridora girlfriend. So I went, okay, that's the beginning of my story. I'm going to have something like that happen. And then it's sort of, people talk about, do you plan ahead? Do you outline? I kind of have the glob method. I have some characters, I have some background, I have some story, I have some people with motivations. So it kind of just turns into sort of layers of, like the layers of a planet, I guess. You have the core, and then you have the little bit more and a little bit more, and then it all rockets off to the hopefully surprising and satisfying conclusion.
That's
it's messy, I admit.
You mentioned earlier that you write like women's fiction beach reads as well as the mysteries. And you write under a pen name for some of those, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I do.
How do you approach those projects differently when you're writing a mystery as opposed to a beach read? You mentioned earlier that the kind of the shape of the story is different, whereas a beach read is more the map of the emotional journey, and then the mystery is more of a whodunit, and the focus is different. One is internally focused, one is more externally focused. Yeah. When you're beginning one, is your preparation different for the type of project that you're working on?
In a way, yes. I still do. I still live with the characters. But what I'm focused on, say, in a beach read as opposed to a mystery is what's happened? Why is this person reacting this way, or these people? I'm kind of it takes a village kind of writer about my characters. It's like characters for me don't live in a vacuum. I have a lot of characters in my books. I have a community. But in the beach reads, it's about the emotional relationships and the progress of their relationships that I sort of, and you have to get yourself in that mindset. You know, sometimes I want to just put a mystery in because that would be so cool, but I try not to like overlap too much. In the mysteries, I also find that, you know, the story is important, but to me, you know, the mystery is like any murder. Somebody dies, somebody killed them, somebody has to catch the killer, right? I mean, there's your story. There's your murder mystery. What interests me is what happens to the people when this person is killed? What happens to their community? So I tend to do a little more of that in my mysteries than just he went here and he went there and he found this. But they're very different. One is like a cosmology of emotion and progress as a whole person, and the other is how the person is relating to the world and making it a better place, for lack of a better description. So does that? I mean, it's a fine line. But yes, I sometimes have to drag myself up and go, well, no. Do not make her feel like that. It's too much feeling in this mystery. Because the difference between the genres is in women's fiction, there's usually what we call a character arc, which I know you know about. Most readers probably do too. They grow and they're different at the end of the story. In a mystery, it used to be in classical mysteries, nothing changed. You know, the guy found the body, he solves the murder. Next book, finds the body, solves the murder, and it's very clever. Now you get to do a lot more with your characters. So you do get to have a lot more emotionality, but that character arc is much slower, and it goes over, hopefully, if you write series like this is my new series is, she will change and grow and prosper, hopefully, over the next few books, rather than being confined to that one book, her character arc.
That's fantastic. Well, let's talk about that book. Ask Me No Questions is the beginning of your new series and the Lady Dunbridge Mystery series. Who is Lady Dunbridge? We touched on it for just a moment earlier. But tell me about this character and how did you get the idea to tell this period mystery?
Well, Lady Phil, her name is Philomena. We call her Phil. She is a dowager at 27, and because she's a dowager, because she's a widow, she gets to have an exciting life. You know, she's not an innocent young girl, because, you know, the things we don't really think of, we always think about the Victorians as being straight up and prudish, but, you know, only certain middle class people were. The upper class did what they wanted to with discretion. So I wanted her to be more Miss Fisher than Miss Marple. And
I get that reference.
Yeah. So, you know, so her father says, look, you can live in the dowager house, or you can come live at home as a spinster or post-spinster, I guess. And she says, you know, I think I'll go to America and make my fortune. So she does. And
she chooses C from an A.
A reputation that follows her. So, of course, she is scandalous not hideously scandalous, but just a soup song. And, of course, she's the hit of all the ballrooms when she gets to New York because they are all such Anglophiles at that period. But when she gets off the ship, her friend meets her that she went to boarding school with, and they find her, and her husband has the new Packard, his new yellow Packard that he wants to show off because automobiles were just coming into the mainstream at this point. And so she hears a shot, and everybody runs over, and there he is, sprawled in the lap of his Floridora girl, Mimi Lapon. So, and mayhem ensues.
And this book is so much fun. That's one thing that really stood out to me is it's very the pace is not frenetic by any means, but it's definitely a page turner. I keep wanting to know what's going to happen, and she finds herself in situations over and over, and I'm like, oh gosh, thank you, Shelley. I'm not going to get to sleep now. How much fun was it doing the research for this book and kind of peeling back the layers of New York that you know now, and kind of getting back to gosh, over 100 years ago now?
I love doing research. I would have been happy being one of those, the secretaries of some big institution back in the old days where you just read books all day and found out strange pieces of knowledge. And I would never, for this book, it really takes place around the recently opened Belmont racing park.
Right.
Which was the biggest and best thing America had ever seen. But there was a huge gambling problem, of course, because of Tammany Hall and the history of corruption. So it was something that ordinarily I wouldn't spend hours and days and weeks and months reading about, but I did, and it was fascinating. It opened a whole world and a whole world of characters for me. It was just great.
Well, that was going to be my question because a lot of times when I'm doing research for something, not only do you get the raw facts of it, but if it's something that you're really interested in and you start to find these little nuggets of things that maybe other people don't notice or that just aren't part of the what's on everybody's mind right now, and you start digging into these things, characters seem to come out of those situations.
Yes. In fact, some of the characters in this first book, there's one, Bobby, who was an ex-prize fighter who now runs the stables of the dead man. At first I thought, well, he's a good murderer. It's just such a colorful character. I thought, I think I got to keep him around. So you never know. You're always being surprised. I mean, it's not like people say, oh, my characters take over and tell me what to do. I've never let them. Sometimes they try and I have to whip them back into shape. But yes, I've met some characters that I had no idea that I was going to meet in this book. It was pretty much fun.
Yeah.
Fun was had by all.
So much fun. When you started this, did you know this was going to be a series for you?
I was hoping. Yes, generally, unless I'm trying to think. Yes, they like series. People like series. Readers like series. Writers like them. There's no reason if you're writing a mystery not to do a series unless you're doing one of those big standalone books, like thrillers or even detective stories. I think mostly have a series with recurring characters, loosely at least. Yeah. And people love to get into a world and stay there and know there's going to be more about it next year or in 6 months or whenever.
Right, absolutely. Which brings us to a question. You talked about those kind of classic mysteries, and they tend to be very formulaic. And you meet this guy. He stumbles over a body, solves crime. Next book, on and on. Right. And you begin to wonder why anyone would ever want to be around this person who does nothing but stumble over dead bodies all the time.
It's the Cabot Cove.
Yes.
Murder, She Wrote syndrome.
Exactly. Yeah, I actually talked to someone one time and they referenced that, and we said, maybe she was the murderer because all she ever did was stumble over bodies.
That would be a good twist. Definitely.
Yeah, it would. So that turns into a dark horror from cozy mystery pretty quickly. What do you do as a writer to keep each book fresh? Because you've written mystery series before. How do you keep that from happening? Just falling into the trap of murder, mystery, solve, repeat.
For me, I have to spend a little time now. I used to spend more time in the formative stages because I have deadlines. Thank goodness. I'm not complaining, but I don't have as much time to do that anymore. I live with these characters for a while, and even when I'm starting, from when I wrote Ask Me No Questions, I've just turned in my next Lady Dunbridge book to my editor, and I've written another beach read. So it's fresh for me by the time I get back to it. Just by the nature of having cleansed the palette with another kind of writing, and vice versa for the other book. But I've been accused of being one of those people who just goes after shiny objects. I am not the most focused and organized person, so I find a shiny object in my research. Like 1907, this book takes place. Well, also 1907 was the banking panic of Manhattan, of the whole country. It was a big deal. And J.P. Morgan bailed the banks out. I mean, history repeats itself, right?
Right.
And I know nothing about banking. I didn't think I wanted to know anything about banking, except, I put my money in. But I started reading about banking and went, okay, I got to do something. And so my Lady Dunbridge doesn't know anything about banking. She doesn't even deal with cash. It was always done for her. She had servants to do all that stuff when she lived in England. So she was discovering things. And I think that's the key, back to your question, is that if your characters are discovering new things, then you won't get in a rut because you're discovering new things.
And having an interesting setting and an interesting time helps that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. I mean, I do total immersion. I mean, sometimes when I'm writing 1907 and the telephone rings, I have to think. I mean, of course, many people had telephones then, but it was a whole different system. You got up, you took it off the wall, or else the butler answered for you and you came to the phone and kind of yelled into the wall unit. So sometimes I want to say, "Oh, the Noble residence, just a moment, please." So I have to pull myself out. But, that I think is really the key for me is I really like to do total immersion. It takes me a little while to get out of it sometimes, but I think that's another key to the freshness of it is just to get yourself in there like a fly on the wall,
right? And
just live that book with your characters.
Well, and I really like what you said about switching up and writing, a Lady Dunbridge now, and then maybe a beach read next. I think that's really crucial to keep things fresh in your mind, because if I read too many books in the same genre, if I read 3 psychological thrillers in a row or something, I start having a pretty dour outlook on life, and and I'm suspicious of everyone around me, and I have to go read something light and or engage my brain in a different way. And if we as readers have to do that, writers that much more so need to palate cleanse from time to time, and or we run the risk of falling into those traps.
That is perfect for writers and for readers too, because I find that I never read in the same genre I'm writing in, which you think you would to get some pointers or steal material or something, but I find that it completely throws off my rhythm to read a mystery while I'm writing a mystery. If I'm writing a mystery, I'll read fantasy or maybe mainstream but just something totally opposite.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Is that when you're writing, you're not drawing necessarily on your immediate influences. So, if you're writing mystery, reading mystery, you're really drawing on what you read years ago and all of those stories that have kind of become part of you through the osmosis of reading and get to be part of your personality. Those are the things you're drawing on.
Well, that's true, but I find, I also am a mimicker because I'm a dancer, so I learn, how to do stuff like physically. But I find myself, if I read someone I really like, I will mimic their sentence rhythm or, the way they end up a sentence or something drives me crazy. It's better for me to wait till I'm done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Oh, man. The new book is Ask Me No Questions, a Lady Dunbridge Mystery, the first one in a new series. Shelley, since this book is just coming out when people are hearing this, it's brand new and it's available everywhere. What are you working on right now? Are you working on one of the other genres?
Well, I just turned in the next Lady Dunbridge Mystery.
Nice.
And I am in edits for my beach story, which will come out in June, which is called A Beach Wish. And I'm in the formative stages of the next beach read. Because,
Nice.
We're always a year ahead of the actual book coming out. So this book was, Ask Me No Questions was finished over a year ago. So, I'm always busy. Thank heavens.
Thank heavens. That's right. Shelley, if people are just learning about you and want to know more about you and dig into your back catalog and all of that good stuff, where can they find you online?
I have two websites, shelleynoble.com and shelleyfredant.com, under which I write like cozier contemporary mysteries. And if on the front page, on my homepage, there are all my links to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of the links. You can find me there.
Excellent. Well, we are going to send everybody we can to pick up a copy of Ask Me No Questions. There's a link to it in the show notes at hankgarner.com for those of you listening. Shelley, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Those were great questions. I enjoyed that very much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Welcome to historic Sleepy Hollow, settled in 1640. Jason had looped around the town and had come up Broadway from the south. Behind the retaining wall next to the sign, a yard worker turned on his leaf blower, sending a tidal wave of yellow and red up and over the stones to splash off the windshield of the RV. They passed antique shops, a Shell station, and a Food King grocery. "This is the same Broadway, said Eliza. "It goes all the way down to Times Square. Used to be an Indian trail, Manhattan to Fort Orange, for the fur trapping business." She kissed the dog. "Oh, don't worry, baby. Nobody's going to skin you. And you know what the town's most famous for?" "Well, duh," Jason said. Every kid named Crane, especially one as tall and skinny as Jason, had heard a lifetime of Ichabod jokes. He hoped never to hear another. "Did you know it was a real place?" "Of course," he said, though he hadn't. "Don't be so smart," said Eliza. "Turn here." The streets sloped towards the Hudson, the hillside trying to shake the village off its back. Jason slipped in behind a UPS truck and drove upwards. They turned onto Gory Brook Road. He stuck his head out the window, trying to pass. The UPS truck turned aside to the right. And he saw the house. Here, said Eliza. She pointed at the driveway of 417 Gory Brook. Jason brought the RV to a smoke-belching halt. The house stood on a knoll, above a steep yard that angled downwards toward the Hudson. An ancient sycamore on the front lawn leaned precariously. The roof was an irregular A-frame, with a long slope on the left and a short one on the right, like a rotated checkmark. The upper floors were trimmed with bands of chocolate-brown wood in a rectangular pattern. They made the house look as if it were trapped behind the bars of a jail cell. A tiny triangular portico extended over the front door, which was rough-hewn, rounded on top, held together by two vertical metal bands and dotted with nail heads. A Gothic novel in Braille. The gray-blue curtains at the ground floor bay window gave the place a veiled eye aspect, like his grandmother's cataracts. The house seemed to be inspecting Jason with that eye.
"What are you doing here, boy?" "I'm watching you."
Eliza put a hand on his shoulder. He jumped. "This is it," she said. She slapped the dashboard. "This is what?"
"Our new home."
"But—" Jason turned to her, baffled. Her face sparkled with delight.
"Surprise!"